Still, oh, here we go. Continue.
It's good to see you and not as a still image, Michelle.
I need to share my screen.
Thank you. Now you keep her on track, okay?
That's the idea.
All right.
I went ahead and made you a co-host. You should be able to share your screen now.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. So you can see it, but you can still see the notes on the side. You know what though? I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Can everybody see? Yeah, because before it just completely went away. Don't want that. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Because I heard nothing. So,
Miles you can unmute yourselves.
Yes, Miles Morales, T'Challa, and Falcon. Yeah, unmute yourselves at certain points, but for the purposes of beginning, we should probably keep everybody muted so we can all hear. Black men using superpowers to navigate confirmation bias in counseling. And we'll start by saying we have no relationships to disclose. And I want to say a special thank you to two people who edited with us, Dr. Shavella Pittman and Inlo Wilson. So the abstract, the overview was printed in your guide, but in a nutshell, the construct of race has been historically powerful in American social structure, particularly for Black men. This presentation today explains the challenges, misconceptions that may influence counselors of any race working with Black men throughout the diaspora. Using humor and superpowers, the presenters invite the audience to discuss and challenge their understanding about Black men in traditional counseling and organized social structures with a plan for future change. And we'll start out with who are we? I'm Tiffany Rush Wilson. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I am also a licensed psychologist in Ohio and a counselor in Canada. I'm the associate department chair here at the Chicago School in the clinical mental health counseling department. And I have a couple of specialties, usually things that are oriented around traditional definitions of gender, body image, eating disorders, and things related to athletes. And who are you?
I am Lawrence Rush Jr. I am her little brother in size only. Said that wrong. I am a little brother, but not in size only. I'm an ordained minister at the PCUSA. Currently, I'm the pastor of Trinity Presbyterian Church in South St. Pete, and I am also a chaplain at Tampa General Hospital. The work that I do, my focus ministerially is on the concept of love, the idea of what is it, how do you receive it, how do you give it, and how do you share that knowledge and that love with everyone else?
Awesome. So today we're going to identify the perceived importance of race, the construct in counseling, and other helping structures. We're going to identify the importance of identity and how it is constructed for Black men, and understand what is meant by the term Black diaspora and its significance in identity formation. And finally, we're going to analyze the impact of helper perception on help seeking among Black men. Have a couple of requests for you. This is a challenging topic potentially, probably more so for some than others. I lost my filter many, many years ago, so this is just normal conversation for me, but it may be a little bit more challenging for other people, so please participate. Whatever comes to your mind about Blackness in general, keep those things in mind because we'll ask you to share them if you're comfortable toward the end of the presentation. What do you think of when we talk about Black men as being super, or even in some cases, subhuman? We'll talk about myths and stereotypes. And also, I want to make it clear that we are not getting rid of the idea of Black men as superpowered, but repurposing that notion. So we're not going to go through all of the literature on any of the slides, but we do want you to know that there is literature out there around the historical context of Black men, the imagery that surrounds Black men, some of the languaging we use when it comes to talking about race and Black men in particular. There are many stereotypes out there. There are things that people talk about, like locking their car doors when a Black man walks past them. You want to make sure that we are aware of those things and also have an awareness that the Black men who are the objects of this type of conversation are also aware of these types of thoughts had about them. We want to make sure we look at this through the lens of the WEIRD literature that we ascribe to, which is WEIRD is an acronym for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And that lens sometimes does not allow for fair play for all groups. Is there anything you want to add to this before I move forward? No, Larry?
I'm just glad you included me in this because I can help give the perspective of a Black man.
Yes, that's why I wanted you here. But the first thing I'm going to ask you to consider, all of you, and not so much to answer yet, but please consider what your thoughts are when you think about Black men. And this can be a pretty personal thing. They might not always be the best thoughts. Sometimes they are amazing thoughts, but just kind of keep a pulse on what comes to your mind when we give you the prompt, Black men. Sometimes Black men are seen as superhuman, and that can be dehumanizing. LaRon Barton wrote this quote about his experiences as a Black man. He said, "The boogeyman is real. He is not a monster with long fangs, sharp claws, red eyes, and a tail who lives in your closet and comes out when the bedroom light is off. He is, in fact, a man of different ages, heights, weights, and skin complexion. He is the Black man." Makes me kind of sad. Also want to make sure that we are aware of our worldviews. Black men are human. They are capable of both resilience and of hurt and pain. I like Terry Melkert's theory of biopsychosocial, the biopsychosocial lens. He looks at science and he looks at psychology. He looks at sociocultural factors. He looks at psychological factors and how all of these different components of one's life interact to create our identity. This next one I'll give to you, dude.
From my perspective, from my professional and personal standpoint, in the Reformed tradition, we believe that God is the one who initiates everything. God is the creator of all. God is the driving force. And so Ephesians 4:6 says that one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. And so that idea is that the God that we serve, the God who is the one that created everything, first of all, did create everything, is over all things, so is in control, is through all things. So what that basically means is everything that exists, all these things we'll be talking about in terms of pop culture, all these things exist because God has willed it to be so, and so it can be used as a tool for his ministry, for his work, for teaching, for etc. It also means that because we are all created by God, we're all God's children, then all of us, by the very nature of us existing, means that all of the theological, personal, any kind of assistance, guidance, counseling that we need is available to us because we are all equal. We are all God's children. God is the Father of all. And so we don't put up walls to separate who is accessible and who is not.
So with that in mind, we look at this as being, theoretically, Black men are a part of an equal footing of humanity, no matter what lens you use. The other thing that I do want to make sure, we'll talk about Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality a little bit later, is the gaps. And this is the gaps in our own experience as clinicians or as helpers in any type of profession. We have to make sure we're aware of our own experiences, our own comfort levels in dealing with whatever client population we are discussing. And in this case, it's Black men, and the amount of skill that we have in working with that particular population. You may be an excellent clergy person. You might be the most amazing practitioner in the whole wide world, but absolutely clueless when it comes to working with Black men. If you have that deficit and you're going to be working with that population, it is your responsibility to learn more about the varied experiences had by members of this particular group.
And it's important to realize that we all do have our own biases. In my work as a chaplain at the hospital, I've run across numerous kinds of people from all walks of life, and I have learned that one of my biases is against the wealthy. And I have to realize that part of me wants to say, you know, suck it up, you're rich kind of a thing. but people's grief is their grief. And the things they struggle with are things that they struggle with. And it is a genuine struggle. And so even though I have a bias, I have to put that bias aside so that I can give care to people who need care. Because all people on some level, on some point, need care. So being aware of your biases is the first step, and then being able to function outside of them is the next step to take.
Absolutely. And one of the things to keep in mind is, like I said previously, the people about whom you're having these thoughts often have an awareness that this type of thought is being had about them. So can we really, as question 2 reads, can we really say the things we are thinking about Black men? One of the things that I shared with my brother and with anybody who would listen at the time was an experience I had last summer in Brooklyn. I was in Brooklyn with my daughter, who was, she was 18 years old at the time. She's 19 now. And we were walking on the sidewalk in Brooklyn. The sidewalk was narrow, and I looked behind me and saw that there was a man walking toward us, a man who, typically looked like a Black man. But what I did with her is I told her to move over because the sidewalk was narrow. He was walking faster than us, and I wanted him to get by. He didn't take it that way. He was really mad at me and called me probably everything but a child of God or a human being. He was really pissed off with me for moving over. And he ranted for a minute, and then I stopped him and said, can we talk about this? Like, you seem like you're pretty pissed off with me. Let's talk about this. So he actually stopped and we talked for a while. And he wanted to know why I moved, because I saw you coming. I was trying to be respectful. And he said, I know how to say excuse me. And I said, and I know how to move out the way. So we talked for a while, and eventually he did apologize to me. But the experiences that he'd had throughout the course of his life had been so negative that when he experienced this woman who's supposed to be on the same team as him, the way he sees it, move out of the way because I thought he was dangerous, he was offended, despite the fact that I really thought I was being respectful to dude when he was coming toward me. I moved out of the way and told him, I'm not afraid of you because you're a Black man. I have a Black brother, Black father, uncles. They're Black men in my family and my life. And you being a Black man is not at all a frightening thing to me, just simply based on your existence. But the experiences that he'd had show that people did see him as a danger just because he exists.
And to echo that from the other perspective, as a fairly large 270-pound Black man, I have noticed that my strategy in those kind of situations is to be overly polite, overly friendly, overly accommodating, make sure I say excuse me, make sure I do things to put other people at ease. And that helps kind of to deal with their anxiety and a little bit of mine. I think that the gentleman you're talking to, I think that strategy was dealing with his own anxiety because he just couldn't hold it back anymore. It was his form of decompressing. Yeah. So there are different strategies to it, but there is very much an awareness as a Black man of how you are perceived as a Black man.
So difficult discussions, and we won't talk about each and every point on here, but the whole Lives Matter movement, which was initially started by Black women, but it necessarily involves the experiences of Black men, was interesting to watch as a Black person, or as a woman who self-identifies as Black, because people took the Lives Matter movement to mean, sometimes for their own convenience, that Black people believe that only Black lives mattered. And that wasn't the point. If we wanted to modify it, two could have gone at the end. Black lives matter too, because Black people have existed throughout the course of history in situations where it was very clear that their lives were not valued as much as lives of other people, or sometimes at all. And when you live in that kind of context, it's very easy to feel the stress and the weight of constantly being reduced to a lack of importance.
I'm sorry. It's interesting as you think. I was remembering back, a close friend of mine, who I won't mention right now, I had to explain that concept to him, that it was an assumed two at the end of it, because in his mind, it was almost a reaction, an aggressive reaction to white supremacy. Was Black Lives Matter, period. Like, you didn't see us before, now we don't see you. And I had to explain to him that no, it's not Black Lives Matter, period. Black Lives Matter too, because we have been forgotten and downplayed and diminished so much that we need to remind you that we're here too and we're just as important.
And the other thing that comes out of that particular movement is that there were times where people were in a position where they were saying, my life matters, please see it, but let me make you feel comfortable about the fact that I want my life to matter too, because sometimes when I assert the fact that I'm as important as you, you're offended. So let me sugarcoat it and put some icing on it and make it palatable for you to see my life as being important when it should be important because it's a life. Some other things here. One other thing I do want to make sure we cover is there's a complex discussion that can be had too about Black men, because Black men can be seen as the oppressor by some women of color or by some women, period, and then also function in a space of being the oppressed. So that creates an extra layer of complexity for the identity of the people who self-identify in this group. And it's not that Black people of other genders don't have that experience, but I think in this instance, instead of including all Black people, no matter where they fall on the gender continuum, we're specifically talking about the experience of Black men. Diaspora is a word I keep using. It is defined as consisting of people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. Its constitutive act declares that it shall invite and encourage the full participation of the African diaspora as an important part of our continent in the building of the African Union. It is essentially a term that's used to connect the dots with people who are no longer in Africa back to the African continent, largely because of the ways in which Africans were forced away from the African continent many, many years ago. It is not meant to be something that excludes people, but it's more of a term of inclusion. Mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality, and before, I've heard her work before, but did not realize until fairly recently that she was an attorney and that this work was done in response to lawsuits and helping people understand that women who sued an auto company received a judgment that said that these women could not pick to be women, Black, and Black women. You can't have all three of these different identities. And her point was, yeah, you can. Because the lived experience of these particular, in this case, women, was this intersection between identities and the separate identities. We don't have just one way to live. There are different contexts and different times when different things matter more. The same thing is true with Black men. The other thing to keep in mind about Kimberly Crenshaw's work is that intersectionality is not a tool to rebalance mistreatment and power structures. She wants to eliminate disproportionate and disparate power structures. In her mind, it's not that power structures that exist should be dismantled so someone else can take over. It's that playing field should actually and truly be leveled. And it also takes into account that there are sanctioned and real dangers for Black men with existing that we have to keep in mind. There have been police interactions. We had a whole summer where we saw lots of police interactions, state-sanctioned killings, and also vigilantism. Also evidenced in that same summer when people called the police, and it almost became joke-worthy on late-night talk shows of Black people having the police call on them for barbecuing and lemonade stands and all kinds of things.
It's also something when you say vigilante that strikes a personal chord with me as a Black man living in Florida, which is a stand your ground state. And when Blackness, when being a Black male, when being a large Black male, by virtue of existing is seen as a threat, I have to really be mindful of my surroundings and who is around me, because I don't honestly know who will see me as a threat. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, trying to alleviate other people's anxiety when seeing me and being extra nice and extra friendly and extra everything like that. It's a survival mechanism. So less threatening means you're not going to pull a gun on me, hopefully.
And that's the reality of it. And we want to make sure that we don't sugarcoat that to the point where people don't realize the seriousness involved in everyday experiences and lived interactions. Also, we want to make sure we are aware of the hyper-masculine stereotype. This quote by Franz Fanon, I had never before heard before preparing to do this particular presentation. And I read about it initially in Curry's work from 2017, and then had to go back and find the original source to see if this was really what was written, and it was. So the Negro is phobogenic, meaning that the Negro triggers a pre-rational fear in the mind of the white. I would have said white person. This fear objectifies the Negro, over-determining his being as the phantasm of the white mind. The objectified Black is endowed with evil intentions and with all of the attributes of malefic power. We have to keep in mind that these types of ideas are out there. In my doctoral program, we had a class where we had to learn about eugenics, and we had to learn about eugenics as a true way of understanding the differences between people. And it was an incredibly uncomfortable situation where the 3 Black people and there are 47 people, I think, total in that classroom, I had to listen to how I am and these other 2 Black men who were actually from the continent of Africa were inferior and prone toward violence. That's the only class where I had that type of lesson, but I still had a class where there was that type of lesson. So if I'm hearing it and they're hearing it, anybody in that classroom heard it. We have to be aware that this type of messaging precludes the perception of Black men and boys as vulnerable. It disregards the account of these men as potential victims of female violence. It minimizes cultural, sexual, and gender presentations, variability among the Black diaspora. And it's really difficult sometimes to hear. My training is in feminist thought. So I've learned a whole lot about the idea of women being oppressed and power structures that are imbalanced. And then at the same time, I am his sister and my dad's daughter and my uncle's niece and my brother-in-law's sister-in-law. I have these men in my life who are very different from these images that are being presented to me, and that creates some dissonance for me.
It's interesting, as you're talking about from your training, and from my experience on the other side of that, a big part of that is that as men, as Black men in particular, we're taught not to express our vulnerability. If I was ever assaulted by a woman, I would be laughed at for talking about it. It's that kind of thing. I actually remember, I never told you this. In 8th grade, I was messing with this girl, like messing around with her. We were like making fun of each other, kind of a thing. And I guess I pushed the wrong button, because after I said what I had to say, I turned around and she punched me in the base of my skull and nearly knocked me unconscious. Like lights went out, kind of a thing. But it's one of the things that if I told my dudes about it, I would be laughed at. She put me down to a knee. But to tell my friends at the time, you let a girl hit you like that? You let it. So you don't tell anybody. You just want to just keep, because we're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not allowed to be affected by violence if it comes from a woman. That kind of a thing. That's the other side of it.
So you just hold it in silence?
In essence. Or you tell it like a joke. You downplay, you play it off, kind of a thing.
Okay. We can talk about that some more when this is over. We want to talk about, too, the trope of the destructive magic Negro. That is a trope that's associated with Black people regardless of sex, but is pretty persistent with Black men, that Bagger Vance type idea. And this exists in order to depict interracial cooperation between groups, but in a way that's very non-threatening. It's in fiction, it's been pervasive for years, and apparently this magical person who has all of these powers, who has no character development themselves usually, or any kind of lives of their own, or as LeVar Burton said, his character had no sexuality whatsoever. This person takes all of this energy and this gift that they have, and they only apply it to bettering the lives of other people away from themselves. Often that's a white person in these movies where this person is just like this helpful, magical guy.
It's that John Coffey, played by Michael Clark Duncan in the Green Mile.
And while we, go ahead.
The super huge, physically imposing Black man is acceptable because with all of his gifts, he seeks to help out other people, irregardless of what it does to him. He's the helper. And that makes it okay to be big and black.
Yep. The other thing to keep in mind too is while we have these superheroes, they are not superhumans. There was a research study done in 2014 where white internet users were shown a white face and a black face, and they were asked to decide on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, who they thought was more likely to possess these powers. And the questions were quickly, who's more likely to have superhuman skin that is thick enough that it can withstand the pain of burning hot coals? Who's capable of using their supernatural powers to suppress hunger and thirst? Who's more capable of using supernatural powers to read a person's mind by touching their head? Who is more capable of surviving a fall from an airplane without breaking a bone through the use of supernatural powers? And who has supernatural quickness that makes them capable of running faster than a fighter jet? And the last one is, who has supernatural strength that makes them capable of lifting a tank? 63.5% of the respondents thought that this would be the black person, that these things could happen more commonly with black people than with white people, except for 2 items. 2 are less significant. Black people apparently aren't better at reading minds or at falling from airplanes. Those are, we're only slightly more likely to do those things.
I just thought of something that's kind of interesting in terms of the no significant difference items.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at popular culture, and as a comic book fan, the movie, what was it with Bruce Willis? Was it Unbreakable? I forget exactly which movie it was, but his power was he never got hurt.
I think somebody in the chat might be answering you.
It was Unbreakable. He was unbreakable, and so the idea of falling from an airplane is like the train correct that he survived unscathed. So that might be something that is in people's psyche, as well as we talk about reading minds. The number one character that people think about is Professor Xavier, who is a bald white guy. So, I mean, those kind of things might be subconsciously in our minds, what we see so often in the media.
Yes. And then there was a second study here. I'll let you talk about that one.
Another experiment, white subjects saw pictures of a black man and a white man and judged who was more capable when it came to everyday activities like walking a dog, picking a ripe avocado, sitting through a baseball game. And the thing that strikes me with that is that the majority of people thought that the white person would be more able of doing the regular, everyday, ordinary activities more so than their black counterparts. So a black man can be able to lift a tank, but don't ask him to pick an avocado. Mm-hmm. I found that to be very, very interesting.
It is. And the thing that makes it interesting, and while these things do sound ridiculous while we're saying some of them, hopefully they sound ridiculous to many of you while we're saying these things, is that these foundational understandings and beliefs guide how we interact with one another and guide how we treat our clients, our colleagues, our friends, the people in our flock, the people who we interact with on a regular basis. So we have to be very aware of both our implicit and our explicit biases. And in real life, compared with white men, more black men are worried about these things: access to healthcare, getting arrested, education, race, and gender. And then also we have black men who are without racial comparison. And I look for both types of literature because I'm really not generally a fan of racially comparative studies, because I don't think they always tell you what you think you're being told. A racially comparative study between a black and a white man means that one of them is the normal and the other one is abhorrent to that person's experience. And that's not always so helpful. So when compared just to their own opinions, black men are also concerned about relationships with their families and friends, work, mental health, physical health, danger and safety, and also perceptions that are had of them. So we keep these things in mind. Like, what if I really believe this stuff? Like, how do I challenge these thoughts, or do I even want to challenge them? Are superficial issues like avocado selection and walking a dog really all that important? And are these humorous moments, are there humorous moments in this? Which I think there can be if we're careful. And we have to talk about how we want to balance these things. Keep this in mind though, that superness, something that makes you not quite human, has been deadly. It has been destructive. It has been dehumanizing. It has denied the hard work and excellence and personal struggles of Black men. It has been unrealistic and provides excuses for racism. However, there are pieces of that superhero mentality and ideal that we do embrace. So we have a movie that a clip we're gonna show. It's about 4 minutes long, but hopefully you'll understand why we have chosen this, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. Okay, let me know if you can't hear.
Take a
Can you
step
hear?
on this, Mark.
Can you hear?
And whenever you're ready, go ahead and tell Chadwick what he and the movie mean to you.
Can you hear?
Darren here. Just want to say thank you so much for making Black Panther. I can't express how much it means to me and in the community and my family. Thank you from the very bottom of my heart for all that you've done, for really being a hero that we really need in a time like this. Thank you so much.
Darren, I think there's something wrong with your microphone.
My king. Oh my God.
I cannot tell you how much it means to have you step into the role as our king and be holding it with such grace and poise and joy.
That was so great. I think we should let's move in for a close-up of that. Let's get a close-up of that right there.
I actually saw it 4 times. I do have a life, but I saw it 4 times. I saw it once with my girlfriend. Also, I want to thank you for having your suit on for most of the movie, because when your chest was out, she was getting a little excited and I felt insecure. So thank you for that. And it means a lot to see a movie that's not like a Black movie, but it's just a great American superhero movie with, you know, people that look like me. So thank you. Like,
Yo.
Okay. What's going on, bro? I'm glad that you got your muscles covered again. I'm glad that you got your muscles covered, because if you would have been all brolic and stuff, it would have been weird, because my girl would have seen it and be like, why did you get his number? So I'm glad.
Well, for me, as the mother of a young son, my son's childhood has been defined by Barack Obama and now Black Panther, so thank you.
Hey, that's way too much praise. Barack Obama.
No.
You guys, you are gorgeous. Gorgeous family.
That is unexpected.
Gorgeous for the
Thank you. Wow, what a surprise.
As a creator, as an entrepreneur of color, just seeing this movie made me realize that our stories need to be told. There's so many of us out here who are trying to create great things, and I was just so inspired as someone who wants to make movies one day and wants to inspire people that art can really change the world.
What type of movies do you want to do? What type of movies?
My name's Kwabanabo Ofe. I absolutely loved this movie. You guys killed it. But on a personal note, my father is African. He's from Ghana. He's a scientist. My mother, my sisters, brilliant African-American women. So basically everything that represents me was honored in this movie. I've seen the movie twice in theaters already and once on bootleg. It was incredible. Thank you.
Wait, you gonna bootleg my movie? Come on, Kwabanabo Ofe.
And you got my whole name right.
H, you know, I am a Howard University student, and that is your alma mater. I am so very proud to say that a bison is T'Challa, the Black Panther. Seriously, when you made your big scene, when you came out, I shed a tear. It was a big deal for me and my friends, and definitely Howard University. So I just want to say thank you so much for showing us that there are avenues for us.
Ain't you? You can give me my euro.
What?
That was fantastic.
What is going on?
I just wanted to thank you for making Black Panther for the kids. Representation is very important. It gives the kids like hope, and it gives them the confidence to say things like, hey, are you Killmonger's mama on the street? when I'm going to work. I appreciate that. I thought I had a stylish haircut. You also got me to see an action movie. Didn't see that happening.
The lay was sharp.
Oh no.
Hello. You should work in show business. That was.
Now what am I supposed to
now
do?
you're beloved. You're beloved
That's
by
right.
everybody.
I don't know if that. Oh, hey, Jimmy, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
That's good. That's good. So anyway,
Words can't even describe what this movie has meant to me and to other Black people. And I know this is for you, Chadwick, but I wanted to take a second to thank the Black women too, because they were so strong on their own terms and answered to no one but themselves. And I think it was so important because they weren't strong because they were angry. They weren't strong because they were hurt. They were strong because they were strong. And that meant the world to me. So thank you, Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever.
So what did you just see? This wasn't just a movie. This version of Black men being more than just human, this superhero version of Black men was moving. This had connection to a group of people who don't always see themselves represented or see ourselves represented in a light that is favorable or positive. That movie was not a movie. It ended up being for many people an event. So superhuman can also be affirming. You want to read this one? This one is you.
Yes. Representation matters. It isn't just a catchy phrase you should say on Twitter when you're feeling empathetic. It really does matter. It's just a great feeling to see yourself in a comic. That is so incredibly true, to see somebody presented on whatever media that you just know can understand what you've been through.
Absolutely. So we want to make sure, again, we reiterate how important it is for filling those gaps. When you don't know about a population, when you don't know the experiences that this group has had, ask people. People are willing to tell you. And if they're not, they don't have to. Find someone else. But get the information that you need in order to work effectively with that person or that person who is a member of a larger group. The imagery is important for Black boys of positive, strong, and imperfect, because none of these people these characters we're going to discuss with you are perfect. They're imperfect being and they have imperfect situations, but that imagery of showing that you are worthy, you can be successful, you can be good, you can be giving, you can be wanted, you can be loved, you can be affirming is important. And as I said before, this is important across the board for humans in general, but in particular for this particular group of boys and men. And it also gives the permission to be unapologetic. You don't have to pretend or water down your experiences for someone else. That man in Brooklyn who ultimately was nicer to me, he didn't feel like he needed to apologize initially because he felt like I'd wronged him, and he had the freedom and the fortitude to go ahead and be himself. So the inspirations here, and I'm going to turn this one over to you. We've got 3 superheroes in particular he's going to share, who are big deals in our family, and then talk a little bit about why we chose them.
So the first one, of course, King T'Challa of Wakanda. Wakanda forever. The first son of T'Chaka and Ramunda, holder of the Black Panther mantle. He is the king and has been endowed with powers thusly. One of my favorite things about him is his humanness, very much on display in the Black Panther movie. I especially love when he was going on an opening assault in the beginning, and he's talking to Okoye about Nakia and how she always makes him freeze up. And he, with bravado, I never freeze. And then the moment he sees her, he freezes up. And it's so human, the idea of a guy who likes a girl and sees her freezes. Even if you're a superhero, even if you're the king, you are still this human who has emotions that affect him. And that's very important. I also think that is very interesting and should be portrayed more, is that in the comic books, he is considered one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe. So beyond the movies and the actual comics, he is one of the smartest. He's one of the go-to people when there's a problem that needs to be solved intellectually. And I think that's very important. And I'm very glad that Marvel Comics was willing to put a Black face to intelligence like that.
And he also had family drama that was the symbolic African-American drama with Killmonger and himself. So there was that piece too, if you look deeply into the movie, where that was a focus.
I still think Killmonger is one of the greatest villains ever, especially in Marvel movies, but just one of the greatest ones ever is the way he was portrayed in that movie, because you understood him. And honestly, the thing that made him a villain wasn't the ideology, it was the methodology. And I think that was very interesting. He spoke very well to what is actually happening. Like T'Challa was looking at the world as it could be, but Killmonger was looking at the world as it is. And I think that it was very strongly written when you look at it through that lens. He is a villain in methodology, but not really in ideology.
And what about Falcon here?
Falcon, real name Sam Wilson. He is a very important member of the Avengers. He's not a founding member, but he is one of the most important members. I think he was maybe the second or third African-American hero that Marvel really did. I'm going off the top of my head. I didn't research this. I think he is. Very important, very important to comic books. He eventually, at some point, takes over the mantle of Captain America. And one of the points says that he successfully navigates a largely white environment while retaining dignity. And that kind of goes in line with him becoming Captain America, because there was a lot of pushback in the comics for him becoming Captain America, not just in the continuity of the stories, but also from fans reading who didn't like the idea of Captain America being Black. So for him to continue on and being Black Captain America for as long as he held that title, it shows his ability to navigate a world where he not necessarily fits in due to the color of his skin. And then Miles Morales. I really, really, really like Miles Morales. In the similar way that Falcon received some backlash when he became Captain America, Miles Morales received a lot of backlash when he was written as the new Spider-Man. And you have to understand in comic books, they often deal in what is called a multiverse. There's different stories happening in different universes running parallel. When Miles Morales first debuted, it was in the Ultimate imprint. It was in a different universe in the main Marvel comics. But he became so popular that when they got rid of that universe, he and a few others were brought over. The thing about Miles that is great is not just the fact that he's an Afro-Latino hero, so that people like me and people especially who look like me that are young can see this hero and relate to him. It's also that they didn't try to recreate Peter Parker with brown skin. They made an entirely different character and told those stories. Peter Parker comes from a broken home. His parents are gone. He lives with his elderly aunt and uncle. His uncle dies in his arms, and he is driven by guilt to become this hero. Miles, on the other hand, lives with both of his loving parents who are both there, who are both present. He receives his powers by, always a radiating spider kind of thing, from his uncle accidentally. So there is more familial connection there. But he doesn't do it because of this feeling of guilt. He does it because he was raised right. Mm-hmm. And it's a whole different set of stories. And you get to, when Spider-Man, the original Peter Parker, first debuted in I think it was 1963, he was a 15-year-old kid in story. He was a high schooler. So all these young kids that are reading comic books can relate because they're around that same age. Kids around this same age now looking at Peter Parker Spider-Man, who's arguably in his 30s, because comics age slower, you can't relate because he's not in high school anymore. But here comes Miles. And Miles is that 15, 16-year-old who's in high school, who's dealing with all those same problems again, it's relatable. But now it's relatable to people who look like me, who needed something to relate to. So I am a big, big fan of Miles Morales, not just for the stories they tell, but for the impact those stories have on a wider readership.
And the superheroism is not limited just to those three examples. Those are the ones we chose to highlight back when we did this proposal, but there are, in the superhero universe, tons of Black superheroes that I didn't even know existed until I started to do the research on this. But then some of the other superheroes we have to keep in mind are people who are not in costume. They're the people who actually influence our real waking lives. And along those superhero lines, even with the fictitious superheroes, there are more than 100 that have been written, and there are at least 4. There are 4 in particular I wanted to highlight who are LGBTQ or gender fluid, so that every person knows that they can be represented. We are not talking about picking just certain people or certain types of people or certain lifestyles or certain socioeconomic statuses or certain educational levels. All people are part of this diaspora that we are discussing. So think about this. What impact do media images and reports have on my view of Black men? What am I learning about Black men by what I see? What am I interpreting? What do I think? And how is that image so insidiously shaping my views? Is this positive? Is it negative? Am I even aware that it's happening? And then our experiences. How do we appropriately acknowledge the paradox of seeing Black men as superhuman and as subhuman? I've heard people say things about Black children not having fathers. I saw my father every single day growing up, and that was part of my normal. I didn't have anything else to base my normalcy on. I saw my brother, my mother's brother, cousins. I saw Black men who were positive Black men on a regular basis. And love my dad, shout out to him. I think my parents have joined this call. And while he may have had lots of corny dad jokes, I appreciated him being there every single day that he was there. So we have to think about this. How can we bring humor into this discussion and still be respectful of the seriousness of the topic? And how can we continue this discussion so that it leads to improved health outcomes for Black men and from everyone, or for everyone? And I'll let you take this one, dude.
Images of Black men promote ideas that are often difficult, negative, and destructive. And that's images that we Black men promote ourselves, that we put out there. But these conversations need to happen. We need to be willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable space, and not just, but that's a two-way street. It's for Black men need to have the strength to be vulnerable enough to share what they've gone through. And it takes the strength of the listener to listen to it and not judge and not try to build your argument against or your defense or whatever, but just listen and learn and understand and be present with those people. That's a language that we use a lot in chaplaincy, being present. I have a story to tell. I ask you just to listen to it. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to defend yourself. I'm not attacking you. I am just telling my story. And in that point, as we listen, as we learn, as we gain empathy, these conversations become less difficult. And change can begin to happen interpersonally and beyond. So it is, in all conversations, it has been a two-way street.
So again, the takeaway, and I hope this is what you take away as we turn the mic over or the floor over to all of you, I hope the takeaway is that when we are talking about interacting with, supporting Black men, and I said I have had the wonderful opportunity of working with professional male athletes, find out how men think, what they want. Make sure you're humanizing them and looking at them through a lens that is human, because dehumanizing constructs have been forced on this particular group for hundreds of years. So as you work with this population, don't treat them like they're anything other than human. They are human. But make sure you allow them that access to humanity as you support them and offer them services and care.
I would also say, to let them know that the conversation that you have, the space that you're creating is a safe space. You all can be trusted with this information because again, we understand, I'm talking as a Black man, we understand how we're seen. We understand that we have to be on guard. And so when you have these difficult conversations, both parties have to understand and be aware that this needs to be a safe space where open sharing can happen. So building that rapport is very important.
Yes. So what questions do all of you have?
I have a question. How do we as professional counselors in training or professional counselors, how do we aid in combating the viewpoint of the media and how they portray Black men in the media in terms of the news or things like that when they focus on like negativity, violence and crime and things like that to change the world's perception or view of what we really feel that Black men are?
I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind, and Larry, feel free to answer too if you want to. One is, I think it's really important too, as he just noted, allow for Black men to have a safe space. So if that person's in your office, ask them, how does this feel? When you're hearing these ideas, these images, these depictions of you that don't fit with you, how does that feel? What is evoked in your mind when you hear that? The other piece is sometimes you might see a story of a person who is a Black man who actually did commit XYZ crime. If this person's your client, you might want to find out what happened there, because sometimes the news's version of that event is not exactly the way it happened from that person's lens. And in no way am I saying if somebody actually does commit something and they wrong a person, are you supposed to say, oh, well, you know, that's okay. It's not that it's okay, but you do want to hear this person's side. You want to make sure this person has access to being a three-dimensional person as you help them navigate whatever the next steps are for them. So talking about it, hearing their perspective, allowing them to be human and people is incredibly important. One of the things I noticed at the keynote is that Ron kept talking about the experience that the players have. They're just people. And while I know that they are football players, when you start to talk to them, you get to see, wow, this is really like a 23-year-old young man who is trying to figure out how to navigate the world through all kinds of interesting obstacles, some of them interesting, some of them painful. And this is just a person at core. Let you do anything you want to add?
People are people. And the way that you would like to feel safe in a conversation with a professional who is offering some sort of care or therapy or whatever, the person you're counseling wants that same feeling of safeness. So again, building that rapport, creating a space that they can trust is safe is of the utmost importance.
Earlier in the chat, I saw a question come from Michelle, and I didn't happen to see an answer. As a former officer in a small southern town, I totally understand racial profiling. This is back in the mid-1980s. Do you feel that racial profiling is still as prominent in the South?
Specifically just the South? Yes, I think it, well, I mean, think about the summer, was that 2017 or 2018? Where there were just tons and tons and tons of shootings of Black and brown men. And many of those allegations were against police officers who were accused of behaving based on racial bias. There is a commercial that goes around, it airs here in Canada and airs in the States too. And I saw this person do a speech for the NFL where his cousin had a flat tire. He pulled over, he called, it wasn't AAA, I think it was AT&T roadside assistance. Some police officer who's no longer a police officer, he's a prisoner now, came up and asked the guy what he's doing. He said, I'm changing my tire, and the cop shot him 5 times, killed him. The only saving grace was that well, he died, but the AT&T officers were recording the call. So that was really all that happened. There was no fight, there was nothing else that goes on. So while I wouldn't say the majority of cops just go out and shoot people, there of course are still some instances where racial profiling does happen. Yes, I would say yes. And I would say that I've had police officer clients who also would say yes. We know that in any group that there are people you have to be aware of.
Yeah, I was going to say that I have a couple of colleagues down here that are in law enforcement, and yeah, just period. Yes, it is still very much a thing down here.
There were two other questions from Kira. In the presentation, it was mentioned how a lot of men are taught to hide emotions. How can we as clinicians help break this down?
Okay, men, what do you think?
Huh. It's a really difficult thing to do because it is so ingrained in what is considered to be manliness and masculinity. I hate to sound like a broken record, but it very much comes back to the idea of creating a safe space where they can feel safe to share. Because in my experience, not just personally, but in talking to other Black men, because Black men do feel more safe to talk around other Black men. If we lament not being able to emote. Like the only emotions that are acceptable for men and Black men in general are like apathy and anger. We feel other things, but we aren't necessarily allowed to share them. So if we could be given a space where we feel genuinely safe enough to share that, we have them. We've been taught to suppress, and society generally has reinforced that suppression. What do you think, Tiff?
Okay.
Alex asked, in conversations that you have had, do you find it necessary to have such conversations between Black women and men? Not necessarily how Black men are portrayed, but perhaps a conversation that should be had on understanding each other's obstacles.
An amazing conversation to have, yes. I think if there was a conversation had that could also address the idea that defensiveness might be there early on in the relationship, but could be dialed back, and we can really get to the core of what we need to discuss, then that would be a beautiful conversation to have. Absolutely. Yeah, that would be on my list of fantasy items. It's a good question. Thank you for asking that one.
And there's one final one. I know we're coming up in the last couple minutes. Do you think that female Black counselors can counsel Black men without transference? From Karen.
I do. I see clients 1.5 days a week, one in my own little practice, and then I see NFL players. So they are all men. And I think one of the things, and actually most of the team clinicians, the overwhelming majority of them are female. And I think what the NFL did with that is create a bunch of aunties because these men seem to have trust in the women with whom they speak. So yes, I do think that it is possible. I think as the clinician, you have to be very much aware of any transference or counter-transference going on, especially counter-transference, and know that that can be destructive to the relationship you're having, but it's possible, yes. At least that, it's been possible in my life. So if it can be possible for me, I'm assuming it can be possible.
You're a superwoman, Tiffany.
5'2" superwoman, but yeah, I think so. But I do believe that you have to keep checks on it. I do go to supervision. We talk a lot about the things that go on with the players. And one of the things that I have to be hyper aware of is sometimes I look at them in the same ways that I look at my brother or my mother's brother or my father's brother. And I might feel a little defensive if somebody attacks one of the players, and I have to watch that. So there's not like a sexual attraction there, but sometimes there is a boundary that I have to make sure I maintain because this person is my client, not like, my cousin.
I'm glad you said that because I work with different people in my internship and like substance abuse, and I see a few Black males in there. See that, it's a very small practice, so it's just becoming diverse, I guess, adding me. So I noticed that they told me at first that I came in like a student with a little book, but when I just come in and I'm natural with them, they feel more safe. So, but I noticed that I feel like you, like I have to check myself sometimes because like I see them sometimes like I'll be my uncle or my brother. So.
Yep. Exactly. Okay, so Grace put in the chat the CE evaluation. Please evaluate. Thank you so much for coming. I know this was a little bit later in the evening for a lot of you. So thank you for your time and for spending time with me, my brother, and my parents. I see my parents are here too. So thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good job.
Yay, thank you.
You made me
Ah.
cry.
I didn't mean to make you cry.
I know.
I'm so glad you were here, Lorianne.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Rush Wilson, I had to transfer the host. It looks like it's back on you, so you may have to stop the recording.
Okay.
Because I can't now.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Here we are.